There's something you should know right off the bat. My mother is not someone you'd call mom in the traditional sense. She's Miriam. And I know that sounds strange, right? But trust me, there's a reason. Miriam has always felt like she's still in her 20s, like the whole mother label would somehow age her. To her, that word doesn't fit. She's never wanted to be someone who's old enough to be called that. When I was little, it always felt like we were just two roommates instead of parent and child. I didn't understand it back then, but now I do. I was an accident, at least. That's how Miriam always put it. She was barely out of high school when she found out she was pregnant with me. My biological father, Charlie, was a high school dropout with dreams of playing guitar in some obscure band. He wasn't the type to stick around, and when he found out I was on the way, he decided he'd pay his child support and then disappear. He made it clear to Miriam that he wasn't interested in raising a kid. He wasn't ready for responsibility, and frankly, he didn't want the relationship that came with it. Miriam was crushed. She thought having a baby would fix things, but instead, it was the final blow to their relationship. Miriam had hoped things might get better, that a baby would bond them, but Charlie? He just wasn't interested in playing house. When I was born, the tension between them never lifted. Every time Charlie came around, Miriam couldn't help but pick a fight with him. She'd snap at him over little things, anything to keep the anger bubbling up. I didn't get it then, but I soon learned. She'd make comments like, "If he really loved you, he'd be here," or "Your father doesn't even care about you, just like he didn't care about me." As a kid, I never really understood the weight of her words. But when I got older, the truth started to make sense. Charlie wasn't the villain she painted him to be. He was the one who showed up every weekend without fail. He wasn't perfect, but he cared for me. And that, in my eyes, made him a much better father than Miriam ever gave him credit for. When I was 6, Miriam married a guy named Nathan. Nathan was the complete opposite of Charlie, calm, steady, and kind. He never made a big deal out of things and accepted me like I was his own. For the first time, I felt what it was like to be part of a family that didn't leave you wondering if you were loved. But despite Nathan's best efforts, things between Miriam and me didn't improve. In fact, it felt like she had a whole new focus, my younger half-sister Audrey. Audrey was the golden child. Miriam poured all her love into Audrey from the moment she was born. I'd watch them together, Miriam doting on Audrey, buying her everything she wanted, whispering sweet things in her ear. It stung every time. I didn't get much of that attention, and no matter how hard I tried, it never seemed like I could win Miriam's affection. It wasn't just the material things, it was the way Miriam looked at me, like I was an inconvenience. She would pass me over for Audrey in every way. If I asked for something, I'd usually get the same old hand-me-downs from my cousin, and Miriam would dismiss it with a, "You don't need anything new." Audrey's birthday was always a huge event. There were balloons, parties, decorations, everything was perfect. And then there was my birthday. A pizza, no cake, no presents, nothing. Every year, it felt like I was invisible in my own family. Miriam never once tried to explain herself either. When I pointed out the difference, she would snap. "Maybe if you'd been better behaved, I'd spend more on you, or go complain to your father about it." I tried to talk to Charlie about it, but he just didn't understand why Miriam treated me this way. He'd suggest we talk to her together, but she always shut him down, saying, "This is my house, my rules." Every attempt to have a calm discussion turned into a full-blown fight. When I turned 18, I left for college, hoping that distance might change things. I figured maybe, just maybe, things would be better when I wasn't living under Miriam's roof. But the truth was, I was just as invisible to her from miles away as I was living with her. Calls were few and far between, and when she did call, it felt more like an obligation than a genuine interest in my life. Nathan, Audrey, and even Charlie kept in touch more than she did. They made sure I didn't feel abandoned, but Miriam, she was nowhere to be found. It wasn't until I graduated from college that things got even more complicated. I'd been dating Alex for a while, and he was great. He was everything I had ever wanted in a partner, supportive, kind, and understanding. He didn't even bat an eye when I told him about my strained relationship with Miriam, but Miriam's attitude didn't change. At my graduation party, she didn't even bother to show up on time, and when she finally did arrive, she was acting cold, distant. But then, something strange happened. She started paying way too much attention to Alex. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe she was just trying to be polite, but it didn't stop. She made snide remarks about how Alex, who was several years younger than me, was out of my league and how it was surprising someone like him would be interested in me. It wasn't just awkward, it was hurtful. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just her way of making conversation. But deep down, it started to bug me. The next time I saw her, she was oddly friendly with Alex. They became Facebook friends. Miriam, the woman who had barely shown any interest in my life, suddenly wanted to keep tabs on my boyfriend. It felt invasive, but I didn't know how to address it. The more time went on, the more I realized that Miriam wasn't just interested in my relationship. She was jealous. It wasn't until later that year, when Alex and I broke up, that Miriam's true feelings came out. She told me, flatly, that she thought Alex was too good for me, and that I didn't deserve someone like him. That was the moment when I realized something had shifted. Miriam wasn't just my mother anymore, she was a rival, and I wasn't sure how to deal with it. After I graduated from college, I thought things would settle down. I figured maybe, just maybe, I'd get some space from Miriam's constant jabs. I was wrong. What I didn't realize at the time was that the years of tension between us were only setting the stage for what would come next. The thing is, I had spent so many years trying to prove myself to Miriam, seeking her approval in all the wrong ways. I got good grades, I worked hard in college, and I even found a boyfriend who seemed to be everything I'd been looking for. Alex was thoughtful, supportive, and loved me for who I was, flaws and all. For the first time, I felt like I was in a healthy relationship. But that didn't sit well with Miriam. In fact, it seemed to unsettle her in ways I couldn't quite understand. At first, it was subtle. She'd make comments, like how Alex didn't need someone like me, as if I was somehow beneath him. I brushed it off. It wasn't the first time Miriam had made me feel small, and I wasn't about to let it ruin what was becoming one of the best relationships of my life. But over time, her comments grew more pointed, more frequent. It wasn't just about Alex anymore. It was about everything. I remember the first time I noticed how her attitude shifted. We were all out for dinner, Miriam, Nathan, and Audrey, celebrating my graduation. Things seemed okay at first, but after a few glasses of wine, Miriam started going on about how surprising it was that Alex was with me. She even said, "You must have done something right, huh? Must have caught him at just the right moment." The way she said it made me feel like I had somehow tricked Alex into being with me. Like I was some kind of consolation prize. The worst part was when she started to compare me to Audrey. She couldn't help herself. Audrey's boyfriend is so much more grounded. He's on his way to a great career, Miriam said, practically glowing as she spoke about Audrey's boyfriend, a guy who was basically the opposite of Alex, safe, predictable, and, in Miriam's eyes, more appropriate for me. I don't know why I didn't say anything right then. Maybe I was too stunned. Maybe I was just tired of dealing with it. But in that moment, I realized that Miriam wasn't just being critical, she was being cruel. She was comparing her two daughters as if we were commodities, as if Audrey's life had been carefully planned out to meet her expectations while mine was just a mistake. And the worst part? She didn't even care how it made me feel. It wasn't long after that dinner when the bombshell hit. Miriam, in her usual passive-aggressive way, dropped a comment about how she was so glad I found Alex. But honestly, I always thought you'd end up with someone like Ben. Ben was this guy I had dated briefly during my first year of college. He was safe, boring, even, and someone Miriam had absolutely loved. She had practically begged me to marry him back then, but I'd known it wasn't right. And yet, there she was, still hung up on him. "He would have been a good match for you," she said. That's when it hit me. She was trying to control my life from a distance. Miriam had spent so much time manipulating me into feeling like I wasn't good enough, like I was always missing something, always failing to live up to her expectations. And now, it seemed like she had this weird obsession with Alex being the wrong choice, as if she had some authority over who I could be with. It was suffocating. I wanted to scream, "Why can't you just let me live my life?" But I didn't. I just nodded, smiled, and tried to change the subject. Deep down, I was angry, but I had learned over the years that anger didn't get me anywhere with Miriam. so I let it go, or at least I pretended to. The months passed, and I tried to focus on my own life. Alex and I had plans to move in together, and things were finally looking up. But Miriam wasn't done with her subtle sabotage. Around my birthday, she called me, all sweetness and light, as if everything was fine. She asked me about the plans Alex and I were making, and I could hear the tone in her voice, this almost sickly sweet tone that only made my skin crawl. She had an agenda, as usual. "So, have you two talked about, your future?" she asked, dragging the words out like they were coated in sugar. Maybe Alex has other plans, huh? It felt like a punch in the stomach. Here I was, planning my future with a guy who made me feel seen and loved. And yet, Miriam was planting these seeds of doubt in my mind, trying to make me question everything. I could feel the familiar ache in my chest, the ache of not being good enough. But this time, something was different. This time, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Mom, Alex and I are really happy, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. And I don't think it's fair for you to keep questioning him like this. He's great to me. I don't need anyone to approve of him. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Miriam didn't respond right away. Then she finally muttered, "I just want what's best for you, that's all." But I knew better. Miriam's version of best was always what she wanted, not what was best for me. And I'd spent my whole life trying to live up to her impossible standards. It was exhausting. That night, I called Alex, and I could tell something was off. He seemed distant, and I couldn't help but wonder if Miriam had gotten to him too. But I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe I was being paranoid, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. And that's when things really started to unravel. As much as I wanted to believe things would improve between Miriam and me, I started to realize that the cracks were only getting deeper. After that phone call, I couldn't help but feel unsettled. Alex was still distant, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Miriam had been planting seeds of doubt in his mind, just like she had in mine for so many years. The next few weeks were filled with small moments of tension that I couldn't ignore. Miriam's calls were more frequent, but they always had an undercurrent of judgment. She'd ask about my relationship, then immediately follow it up with, "Are you sure about this? Maybe you're rushing into things." It felt like she was speaking from some script in her head, one where she was the guiding force in my life, making decisions for me when I should have been the one making them. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it anymore. I was becoming more and more aware of her manipulations and how toxic her influence was. I started to push back a little harder, calling her out on things she said, making sure she knew I wasn't some pawn in her game anymore. It wasn't easy. Miriam had a way of making you second-guess yourself, like a constant nagging voice in the back of your head. But with Alex by my side, I was finding the strength to push back. He kept telling me that I needed to stop letting Miriam control the narrative of my life. And I knew he was right. But the thought of cutting ties with my mother completely, it felt impossible, like I was betraying some part of myself. Then came the day that would change everything. I was getting ready for a weekend trip with Alex when I got a call from Miriam. I almost didn't pick it up, knowing it would probably be another one of her usual disapproving rants. But something made me answer. "Hey, honey," she said, her voice sounding different, nervous, maybe even a little too sweet. "I need to talk to you." "About what?" I asked, a little taken aback. I wasn't used to Miriam sounding so vulnerable. Usually she was sharp and critical, not looking for a heart-to-heart. I want to apologize," she said, hesitating, "for everything. I know I've been difficult, and I haven't been the best mom to you. I don't want to lose you, okay? Can we talk?" I felt a chill run down my spine. It was so out of character for her to admit any fault. I'd never heard Miriam take responsibility for anything, not once. This sudden apology felt off, like she was trying to manipulate me into letting my guard down. But part of me wanted to believe it was real. Maybe this was the moment she'd finally come around. Maybe she'd finally realized how much she hurt me. "I don't know, Miriam," I said cautiously. "This is really sudden. And, it's not just about an apology. It's about all the years of making me feel like I wasn't enough." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before she spoke again. "I get it," she said quietly, "and I've been thinking a lot about it. But there's something I need to tell you, something important." "What is it?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. though I was already bracing myself for more manipulation. "Can we meet in person?" "I need to show you something," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "I promise it'll make everything clearer." I didn't want to meet her. I really didn't. But I had been waiting for this moment for so long, hoping for some kind of breakthrough between us. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the moment I finally saw the mother I'd always wished I had. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop later that afternoon. Alex was supportive but skeptical. He'd seen enough of Miriam's manipulation to know that it was probably a bad idea. But I couldn't bring myself to cancel. This was my chance to understand her, to see if there was any hope of repairing our relationship. When I arrived, Miriam was already sitting at a corner table, looking uncharacteristically calm. She didn't jump up to greet me the way she usually did when she was trying to control the situation. Instead, she simply motioned for me to sit down. There was a strange energy in the air, like something was about to go down, but I couldn't figure out what. We exchanged pleasantries, the kind of small talk you use to fill the silence when you don't know where things stand. But I was waiting for her to drop whatever bomb she had planned, whatever truth she thought would make everything better. Finally, after a few awkward minutes, she spoke. "I've been talking to someone," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Someone from your past. And I think you need to hear from him." I frowned. "Who?" Miriam's eyes shifted around the room before she leaned in, lowering her voice further. "Ian," she said. My heart sank. Ian was my ex. The one guy who had been part of my life in a way no one else ever had. The one person I thought I'd spend forever with. But life, as it tends to do, had other plans. We broke up years ago, amicably, or so I thought. The breakup had been hard, but I had moved on. I thought I had. But Miriam? She never let it go. She never let go of the idea of Ian and me together. She never stopped believing that we were meant to be. And now, it seemed, she'd somehow convinced Ian to come back into my life, to talk sense into me, as she put it. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice rising. Why would Ian be involved in this? Miriam just sat there, hands clasped together, a look of quiet satisfaction on her face. "I've been talking to him for weeks. He's willing to help you see that your life with Alex isn't what you want, that you deserve more, just like I've always said." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mother had been in contact with my ex for weeks, trying to convince him that we should be together again. I could feel my blood boiling. She had no right to meddle like this. And now, my Ian was involved in this? Had she been manipulating him too? Before I could say anything, Miriam pulled out her phone and showed me a message from Ian. The words on the screen were enough to knock the wind out of me. "I still care about you," it read. "I think we should talk. You've made a mistake with Alex." My chest tightened, and I could feel my throat closing up. This wasn't just an apology. It wasn't even an attempt at understanding. This was something far worse. My mother was actively trying to tear my life apart. But the biggest shock? Ian was playing along. The man who I thought knew me better than anyone was now agreeing with Miriam. He was on her side. And that was when I realized Miriam had crossed the line. This wasn't just about her disapproving of my choices. This was about her trying to control my entire life once again. And for the first time, I understood that I had to make a choice. A real choice. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the message on Miriam's phone. It was clear now she wasn't trying to mend things. She was trying to force my life into some mold she'd created in her head. She wanted me to go back to Ian, to make me believe that my life with Alex was a mistake. She wasn't apologizing, she was taking control again. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. My heart felt heavy, a mix of betrayal and frustration building up inside me. Ian, the person who once knew me better than anyone, was now in league with Miriam, helping her tear down everything I had worked for. And then I realized something that made my blood run cold. Miriam had been planning this for a while. The sweet, sincere apology? It was all a strategy, a way to get me to let my guard down. She'd spent weeks, maybe even months, setting this up, thinking she could pull the strings of my life like she always had. She thought that, because she was my mother, she had the right to dictate my choices. I had to get out of there. I needed some space to process this. But Miriam wasn't done. She was relentless, like a predator who saw an opening and couldn't let it go. "You're not thinking clearly," she said, her voice soft but firm, as if she were the one with all the answers. "You've never been good at making decisions on your own. But Ian, he understands you. He knows what's best for you." "Stop," I said, cutting her off, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I don't want to hear any more of this. You've been manipulating me for years, Miriam. You've never supported my choices. And now you're trying to tear down everything I've built with Alex. I'm not a little girl anymore. You don't get to control me." Her eyes flickered, a brief flash of anger passing through them before it was replaced with that same cold, calculating look. "You don't understand," she said, shaking her head. "I'm only trying to help you." "No," I shot back, feeling the weight of years of suppressed frustration finally breaking free. "You're not helping me. You're trying to make me feel like I'm wrong, like I can't trust myself. I'm an adult now, Miriam. I don't need your approval, and I don't need Ian either." For a moment, Miriam was silent, her lips pressed into a tight line. I could see her trying to find the words to counter what I'd said, but I didn't give her the chance. I stood up abruptly, gathering my things, feeling the anger surge within me. I was done. Done with the manipulation, done with the gaslighting, done with trying to please her. I wasn't going to play this game anymore. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice cold. "I'm done with this." Miriam's face twisted, as if she couldn't believe what I was saying. "You're making a mistake. You'll regret this." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She could think whatever she wanted, but I wasn't going to let her drag me back into her web. I walked out of the coffee shop, feeling the weight of the past few years finally lift off my shoulders. But even as I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving something behind, something important. My mother, the person who was supposed to love me unconditionally, who was supposed to be my biggest supporter. But all I had ever gotten from her was disappointment and manipulation. As I walked down the street, I called Alex, my hands shaking. I needed to hear his voice, to know that he was still there for me, that I hadn't lost him too. The phone rang for what felt like forever before he picked up. "Hey," his voice was warm, comforting, and I immediately felt a sense of relief wash over me. "What's going on? I can't believe it," I said, my words tumbling out in a rush. "Miriam, she's been talking to Ian behind my back, trying to convince him to get me back. She's trying to break me and Alex up. She wants me to go back to Ian." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Alex spoke. "That's messed up, babe. I'm sorry, she has no right to do that." "I know," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. "I just feel so betrayed. I can't believe she'd go this far." "You don't need her approval," Alex said, his voice firm but full of understanding. "You've always been enough. Miriam is just scared of losing control, but she can't dictate your life anymore. I've got your back, always." His words were like a balm to my wounded heart. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had someone who truly understood me, someone who was on my side, not someone trying to mold me into what they thought I should be. But it didn't make the pain of Miriam's betrayal go away. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop feeling like a piece of me had been broken. A part of me wanted to believe that my mom would come around, that maybe, just maybe, she would see reason. But deep down, I knew that was never going to happen. I drove back to the apartment in a daze, my mind racing. The silence in the car felt suffocating, and I couldn't shake the images of Miriam and Ian working together behind my back, trying to manipulate me into doing what they wanted. I thought about everything they had taken from me, my confidence, my sense of self, my relationships, and I realized that I had spent far too long letting them have that power over me. When I got home, I collapsed on the couch, exhausted, emotionally drained. Alex was right. Miriam had never truly supported me. She had always seen me as a tool to fulfill her own needs. And Ian? He was just another pawn in her game. They weren't the people I thought they were. And it was time for me to stop letting them control my story. The days that followed were hard. There were tears, and there was anger, but there was also clarity. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't keep living my life based on the expectations of others. I needed to take control of my own future, no matter how painful that meant the process would be. And then came the final blow. A few days later, I got a text from Miriam. The message was brief, but devastating. Ian is still waiting for you. Don't let him go. That was it. She hadn't changed. She would never change. And I finally understood that the only way forward was to cut ties completely. It wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about protecting the life I had worked so hard to build, with Alex, with my friends, with the people who truly cared about me. I didn't respond to her message. Instead, I blocked her number, and for the first time in my life, I felt free. The weeks that followed my decision to cut Miriam out of my life were a strange mix of relief and pain. On the one hand, I felt lighter, like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had finally been lifted. On the other hand, the void that Miriam had left was loud. It wasn't just her presence that I missed, it was the idea of her, the mother I thought she could be, the one I had always hoped would see me, really see me, for who I was and love me unconditionally. I realized that for so long, I had been chasing that version of her, even though she never existed. Alex was amazing. He was there for me, supportive in ways that were so foreign to me. But at the same time, I felt like I was learning how to be in a relationship in an entirely new way. For the first time, I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. I didn't have to justify my decisions, my feelings, or my choices. He accepted me as I was, flaws, scars, everything. And that alone was healing. But even with Alex's unwavering support, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been living in Miriam's shadow for far too long. I had spent so much time trying to be good enough for her that I had forgotten what it meant to be good enough for myself. I realized, in the most painful way, that I had been waiting for someone else to define my worth. Miriam's approval had been like air to me, and I had suffocated without realizing it. It wasn't just about Miriam anymore. It was about me. It was about finding my own voice, rebuilding my own identity, and taking ownership of my life. I had spent years trying to prove myself to someone who would never be satisfied. Now, it was time to prove something to myself. And so, I started to put the pieces of my life back together, piece by piece, like a puzzle I'd given up on years ago. I focused on what made me happy, really happy. Not the version of happiness that Miriam wanted for me, but the one I had buried under layers of her criticism and expectations. I took up yoga. I hadn't realized how much I needed it, how much I needed to reconnect with my body and my mind. It wasn't just the physical strength I gained, it was the mental clarity. The space I had to breathe, to feel again. I started journaling too, pouring out my thoughts in a way I never had before. I never realized how much I needed to say, all the things I'd kept bottled up, and that process became part of my healing. It was a way for me to rediscover who I was, without the noise of Miriam's influence. I also started to distance myself from anyone who didn't genuinely support me. The fake friends. The people who always seemed to have an opinion about my life, without offering any real care. They faded away. And it felt so freeing to let them go. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need anyone's approval except my own. Alex and I grew closer, and for the first time, it felt like we were truly building something. Not based on anyone else's expectations, but on mutual respect, trust, and love. I found myself planning a future I had never truly imagined before. A future that was mine, and mine alone. A few months later, I got a message from my dad. I hadn't heard from him in a while, but I'd always known he was there for me, even if he wasn't as vocal as Miriam. He told me that he had been talking to Nathan, and they had both agreed that Miriam's behavior had gone too far this time. He didn't know the details, but he knew I had been struggling with Miriam for years. He was concerned and wanted to offer me his support. For the first time in my life, I felt truly heard by my father. Miriam had always painted him as a distant, uninvolved figure, but this message from my dad, simple as it was, showed me that he cared. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to me. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and that was enough. I wasn't sure if I was ready to have a conversation with Miriam again. I wasn't sure if I ever would be. But the fact that I had started to rebuild myself, to find strength in my own voice, gave me a sense of peace I'd never known before. The world hadn't fallen apart without her in it, and in fact, it had started to feel a little brighter. Then came the unexpected call. It was from Leah, Miriam's stepdaughter, my half-sister. I hadn't heard from her much since all the drama with Miriam had gone down, but I had always felt a connection with Leah. She was younger than me, and we hadn't spent as much time together growing up, but there was an understanding between us that I couldn't quite explain. She and I didn't share the same relationship with Miriam, and for that reason, I always felt like we could have been closer if circumstances had been different. "Hey, it's Leah," she said, her voice shaky, which immediately set off alarms in my mind. "I need to talk to you." "About Mom." My stomach tightened. "What happened?" "I don't know how to say this, but she's been really off lately," Leah continued. "She's been saying things, and I think you should know. I don't want to be the one to tell you this, but I think she's been really hurt by you cutting her out of your life." I couldn't believe it. After everything Miriam had put me through, she was the one who felt hurt. The irony wasn't lost on me. My mind raced, trying to process the flood of emotions that hit me all at once. Did Miriam really expect me to feel guilty for protecting myself from her? Was she truly still playing the victim? Leah continued, her voice a little steadier now. "She wants to apologize. She wants to meet, and I think you should give her a chance." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't talked to Miriam in months, and the idea of opening that door again felt overwhelming. But something in Leah's voice made me pause. I knew she wasn't manipulating me the way Miriam had. She was just trying to do what she thought was best, and I respected her for that. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice low. The conversation ended shortly after, but Leah's words lingered in my mind. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face Miriam again. Part of me was still angry, still scarred by the years of manipulation and emotional turmoil. But another part of me, a smaller, quieter part, wondered if there was room for forgiveness. Not for Miriam's sake, but for mine, for my peace of mind. Could I really move on if I didn't address the past? I wasn't sure, but I knew I couldn't make that decision yet. I had to focus on me first, rebuild who I was without the weight of Miriam's control hanging over me. One step at a time. I spent the next few days replaying my conversation with Leah over and over in my head. The more I thought about it, the more conflicted I felt. On one hand, I had spent years of my life trying to please Miriam, trying to live up to her standards only to be constantly let down. On the other hand, I couldn't deny that there was a part of me that wanted some kind of closure, some acknowledgement that what she did was wrong. I knew, though, that I couldn't go back to the same toxic cycle. I couldn't let her manipulate me into thinking I was the problem. But at the same time, I was struggling with the idea of leaving things unresolved. I talked to Alex about it, hoping for some clarity, but even he could see how torn I was. "Babe, you don't have to make any decisions right now," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I know you're not ready to forgive her, and I get that, but you've already made the hardest choice by putting yourself first. Don't let her pull you back into that world where you feel like you're not enough. You are." His words helped, but the uncertainty still gnawed at me. Was I being too harsh by cutting her off completely? Was I denying her a chance to redeem herself? I didn't know. And maybe that was the hardest part of all the uncertainty. I couldn't predict whether I would regret cutting her out, or if I would feel the weight of that decision for years to come. After a few days of this inner turmoil, I decided to call Leah back. I knew I had to make a decision one way or another. I owed it to myself to either move forward with peace or confront the past once and for all. "Leah, I've been thinking about everything you said," I told her, trying to keep my voice steady. "And I don't know if I'm ready to talk to her yet, but I think I need to, if only for my own closure. I'm not sure if anything can fix this, but I can't just keep running from it either." Leah was quiet for a moment, as if processing what I had said. "I get it," she said softly. "I really do. I just don't want you to feel like you're doing this for her. You're doing it for you. Whatever happens, just know I'm here for you. I don't want you to feel pressured to do anything you're not ready for." I appreciated her support, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. I didn't have to make this decision for anyone else. I didn't have to do it because Miriam wanted it or because I felt guilty. I could do it because I wanted to understand my own feelings, and I wanted closure, even if it meant facing the truth about my relationship with her. A few days later, I called Miriam. I don't know why I expected her to answer with anything other than that defensive, cold tone she always used when we spoke. But this time, when she picked up, it was different. "I'm glad you called," she said, and I could hear a strange mix of relief and something else in her voice, almost like she didn't want to show how much she cared. but she couldn't help herself. "I've been waiting for you to reach out. I'm not doing this for you, Miriam," I said, my voice firm but calm. "I'm doing this because I need answers. I need to understand why you did what you did, why you pushed me away, why you thought it was okay to control my life." There was a long pause on the other end, and I could hear Miriam exhale slowly. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said quietly. "I didn't realize how much I was damaging you. I guess I just didn't know how to be the mom you needed. I was too busy being focused on myself." The words sounded rehearsed, like she had said them to herself 1,000 times before, but this time they felt real. Or maybe I was just so desperate to hear something that resembled an apology that I convinced myself they were. Either way, it was the first time I had heard Miriam acknowledge her actions, and it was a small, fragile step toward healing. "I understand you were hurt too, Miriam," I said, my voice breaking a little, "but that doesn't mean you get to control me or make me feel like I'm not enough. I spent so many years trying to earn your love, and all I got was manipulation. That's not love." Miriam didn't respond right away. I could hear the faint sound of her breathing on the other end, as if she was trying to find the words. Finally, she spoke again, her voice soft and filled with regret. "You're right. I should have been there for you. I should have shown you more love, more support. I'm sorry for all the times I made you feel like you weren't good enough. That was never my intention, but I can see now how much I hurt you. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to say that it was too little, too late. Another part of me wanted to believe her, to let this be the moment where we finally move forward. But I knew better than to think that everything could be fixed with a few words. This was a long process, and the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Miriam," I said, my voice steady now. "But I'm willing to try. For me, not for you. I can't keep living with this weight of anger and resentment. It's killing me." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then finally Miriam spoke. "I understand," she said. "Take your time. I'll be here whenever you're ready." And just like that, the conversation was over. I didn't feel any grand sense of closure, but I did feel something, a flicker of peace, maybe. The truth was, I wasn't sure where Miriam and I would go from here. Maybe we would rebuild our relationship slowly, one step at a time. Or maybe this would be the last conversation we'd ever have. But either way, I knew I had taken control of my own life. I had chosen to stop running from the past, to face it, and to start living for myself. I walked into the kitchen where Alex was sitting, waiting for me, and he looked up as I entered. He didn't ask me what had happened. He didn't need to. He just wrapped his arms around me and held me tight. And in that moment, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Story 2. After publicly revealing that my husband is the child's father, my dearest friend extends an invitation to her baby shower to my husband and myself. My husband, who is 32, and I, who are 30 women, went to my closest friend Sarah's baby shower yesterday. Since our time in college, Sarah and I have been great friends. We were roommates at first, but when we realized how much we enjoyed the same music, our bond deepened. Together we went to concerts and created a ton of memories. We had become nearly inseparable by the time we got to our senior year of college. Whenever feasible, spending the summers together in each other's houses. Both of us pursued separate job routes after finishing our education. While I achieved my lifelong aim of landing a highly sought-after job at a prestigious legal firm, Sarah chose to investigate social media as a source of income, since she wasn't sure if she wanted a regular 2 job. We prioritized spending our weekends together, even though our schedules couldn't be more different. Whether it was staying home to watch a movie, going out for cocktails, hiking, or dining at a new restaurant. I got to know Michael on one of our girls' evenings out. I knew he was the one for me the instant I laid eyes on him, when he was at his friend's bachelor celebration. In actuality, we both fell madly in love the same night, despite the fact that we frequently joke about who fell in love first. Thankfully, our marriage has been nothing short of ideal for the past 5 years that we have been blissfully married. I regularly express my gratitude to Sarah for inviting me to the bar that evening. I wouldn't have met my amazing hubby otherwise. After my marriage, Sarah stayed unmarried for a few years. After a while, she met Mark, her present spouse, and this year they celebrated their 2nd anniversary. It was 3 months ago. I was overjoyed when Sarah told me the wonderful news that she was expecting. I was so excited for my closest friend to begin this new chapter in her life and soon hold her child. Since I would be the baby's godmother, I felt honored when Sarah assigned me to plan her baby shower. We thought about a number of themes before settling on yellow, which was Sarah's favorite color. I communicated with the caterer frequently during the planning phase to make sure everything went smoothly and the cake arrived on schedule. The caterer was easy to deal with again on the day of the shower since, as it happened, I had already worked with her during my brother's wedding. To ensure everything was flawless, we got there a little early. Sarah was still getting ready when Mark Meadows shut the door. I fixed the cake when I saw it wasn't centered on the table, as Sarah had requested during setup. The guests began to arrive shortly after, and I was overjoyed to see several of our former college pals. Wearing a bright yellow outfit that complemented the theme of her baby shower, we used the chance to catch up and discuss significant life updates since we hadn't seen each other in years. Everyone around us congratulated her, and she was beaming. Everyone sat down for a delectable meal while the event went on. Before Sarah called for everyone's attention, everything appeared to be going smoothly. She thanked us for attending her baby shower as she got to her feet. I'm excited to inform you that my husband, Mark, and I are expecting her first child, and I have someone very special to thank for that, she said after taking a big breath. I saw Mark staring at Sarah in confusion as he tried to make sense of what was going on, and then he pointed right at my husband, Michael. "Everyone, let me introduce our baby's father," she exclaims. I nearly choked while eating. There was an unsettling quiet in the room, and I could feel that everyone was surprised and unsure of how to respond. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what was going on. My spouse, who is a recluse and loves to be alone himself, took hold of my hand beneath the table. He appeared just as perplexed as I did as I turned to face him. In an unpleasant and uneasy stillness, everyone's eyes were on us. In an attempt to provide some context, I went to Sarah for an explanation. Due to certain personal medical difficulties, my husband and I have been trying to conceive for years, but after going through several testing, we have not been successful. We have not been successful in conceiving. Sarah is one of the few close friends and family members. I've discussed this problem with. After some time, my spouse and I realized that we might not be able to conceive. We therefore learned to be happy with our life together as a couple instead of concentrating on that. Even though Sarah was lying when she publicly named my husband as the father of her child, I couldn't help but feel offended. Tears filled my eyes, but I did my best not to cry in front of other people. Sarah suddenly started laughing and gave her husband Mark a playful shove, saying, "Dude, I was just kidding. All of this is a joke for my Instagram." As everyone looked around in confusion, I installed cameras everywhere to record your reactions. Sarah took us on such a roller coaster of emotions that I couldn't help but feel annoyed with her. I was shocked that my best friend found it amusing to publicly identify my husband as the father of her child, being fully aware that we were having trouble getting pregnant. My husband was red in the face and still clutching my hands when I turned to face him. I could sense his embarrassment at the time. There was a general unease in the room, despite the occasional nervous laugh from a few guests. It caught my attention that Sarah's husband, Mark, did not laugh. He gave my husband an apologetic look and appeared more annoyed than amused. My husband and Mark had grown close over the years, and I believe he felt sorry for us at the time. I didn't want to confront Sarah then and ruin her baby shower, as she continued with the baby shower festivities. I tried hard but couldn't shake the unease that had settled in. After lunch, we played a few games and then finally opened all the gifts. Throughout all of this, Sarah was the only one who seemed to be enjoying herself, chatting with other guests, and clicking pictures for her social media. My husband had previously communicated to me privately that he wanted to leave after the awful meal, but I urged him to stay. I didn't want the visitors to see us leaving away quickly, and I promised him that I would be talking to Sarah regarding this. I believe Mark, too, felt uncomfortable to go through with the party any longer, since he abruptly got up with a severe look. He asked Sarah if they could walk outside for a moment, and I felt that something was about to happen. We could all see and hear them plainly as they chatted, and it was evident that the tone around the room had become unpleasant following Sarah's joke. I observed as their debate got more heated, with Mark's motions growing more impassioned by the minute. Suddenly, Mark's voice soared and his comments resonated across the room. "I can't believe you would do something like this. They are our closest pals, and it's not simply a harmless joke. You also made a mockery of our baby shower and embarrassed me in front of everyone." Sarah continued reiterating how she thought it was just a harmless joke, but Mark wasn't having any of it. Mark persisted, encouraging Sarah to grow up and not make sensitive jokes, especially when they were celebrating the arrival of their kid. The room had gone uncomfortably still now, and all of us could hear their words plainly. My husband couldn't handle it any longer, so he got up and went, telling me he would be waiting for me in the vehicle. Although my heart grieved for my buddy, I also understood how sad my husband was, and I couldn't blame him for leaving. Mark must have realized how heartbroken my husband was when he left. "I'm done," he murmured, turning to Sarah. "I have had enough of your immaturity. We're finished. Even though I will adore this kid, I cannot stay with you for even a moment longer." Sarah started crying when she heard this, and Mark left the celebration. We were staring at one another in shock and unsure of how to respond. I knew my husband needed me more just then, even if my heart hurt for my dearest friend. I also left the baby shower without saying goodbye, since I didn't want to approach Sarah after her tense talk with her husband. My husband was really furious when I got home, and we were both shocked by Sarah's decision to pull this practical joke on us. Mark apologized to us via text message in the evening, stating that he was sorry for what we had to go through and that he had no clue she would pull this trick for a film. Since we didn't want to harbor resentment towards him and fully understood his viewpoint, we were happy that he reached out. Regretfully, I discovered many texts from Sarah when I got up this morning. She said that she only wanted to make a viral clip for her Instagram and that she performed the hoax because she was stressed out from her pregnancy. She asked why I went without saying goodbye and stated she didn't see why we were unhappy about it. She requested that we meet today so that I could take her to her appointment with the gynecologist. I told her that I didn't find her trick funny at all, feeling irritated once again. I told her that her actions were rude and caused discomfort for both my husband and me. I also informed her that I wouldn't be able to accompany her to her appointment that day since I needed some time away from her. In response, Sarah referred to me as a shitty friend for abandoning her at such a sensitive moment. I was incredibly offended by this message since I couldn't believe she would say such a thing because I needed some space. My husband was as furious as I was when I told him about Sarah's message. He recommended that we refrain from interacting with her until she realizes how serious her behavior is. I made the decision to send her one last message, informing her that I would not be communicating with her until she expressed regret to my husband and me for her actions. Furthermore, I warned her that instead of expressing regret, I would sue her if she uploaded the hoax film. In response, Sarah stated that she didn't think she had done anything improper. She also implied that her pregnancy was the reason I felt envious of her. The fact that this lady, who had been my closest friend for over 10 years, would think that I was envious of her after I had gone above and beyond to provide her the ideal baby shower astounded me when I read her response. Sarah informed me that she would not be uploading, but I should set my emotions aside and help her get through this difficult time. She said she needed me more than ever because her husband had not returned home the night before. Because I'm a non-conflictual person. As I read her hurtful remarks, I started crying. I had to make the difficult choice to block her without hearing back after realizing that I couldn't carry on this chat. ATA for not supporting my pregnant best friend because she perpetrated a practical joke on us and was relieved that her spouse had left her. Update 1. A lot has happened since my last update, which was a week ago. First of all, I want to make it clear to everyone that Sarah is not a lighthearted person. Therefore, I was totally unprepared for her to pull this joke. Since then, I have known her, and she has never played a practical joke on anyone. In any case, when Mark announced that he was leaving Sarah, he meant it. During their conversation over the weekend, my husband found out that Mark is actively looking for a divorce attorney. Sarah has been phoning and messaging him nonstop since that day, urging him to return to her and move over his feelings. She has tried to get in touch with Mark, but he has not replied. She even went so far as to accuse him of having an affair with me, which was unexpected. She is gradually changing into someone he no longer recognizes. which is why he is unhappy that their marriage is coming to an end. Sarah wrote a long message to my husband since she hasn't been able to reach me since I banned her. She stated that he isn't much of a guy because he can't get me pregnant and accused him of attempting to destroy our friendship. When my husband got home from work yesterday, he showed me the message. I was enraged. I thought the abrupt shift in her behavior may be caused by pregnant hormones, so I've been attempting to ignore it up until this point. Her rude remarks to my spouse, however, were very inappropriate. Since I was in charge of the baby shower, I made the decision to discipline her. This implied that I was also responsible for the baby registry. Sarah and I had spent several hours talking about her requirements and creating a list of the things she would need for the new baby. But not all of the visitors could afford the ridiculously costly goods Sarah insisted we put on the list. While some attendees of the baby shower followed the list, I saw that others gave her gifts that were not on the list but would be helpful to a new mother. I had intended to give Sarah some of the pricey things from her list because she appeared unhappy. To be sure she wouldn't have access to it if she wanted one, I promptly canceled the order and erased the baby registry when she went too far by focusing on my husband. She'd have to make one from scratch now. In addition, the caterer sent me a message a few days ago about the baby shower, but I was too busy handling Sarah's predicament to reply. The problem is that I had already paid half of the food service's booking costs as a surprise present for Sarah, with the remaining balance to be paid after the baby shower, but I had forgotten about it since I was preoccupied with these recent happenings. I informed Sarah of the problem over the phone with the caterer. After what had transpired at the baby shower, I informed her that I would not be making the remaining payment. The caterer was very kind and told me that she would be sending Sarah the final payment rather than me, because Sarah had made the reservation for the food service in her name and they had communicated before the baby shower. I was happy that I wouldn't have to pay any more money to someone who had publicly insulted us and still does so by sending us nasty texts. I told my spouse about it as well, and he thought it was funny. Even though I've thought about getting in touch with her recently, I've determined that I'm past forgiving her after she sent that message to my husband. I'm appreciative to everyone who helped me see how toxic her actions were and offered assistance. In retrospect, I can think of other times Mom put me down, but up until today, I never really gave it much thought. In any case, I'm going to remain optimistic and let this experience go. I'd rather not waste any more time or effort on her. The second update. This lady has no shame. Sarah sent me an email a few days after I spoke with the caterer. I knew she was back with her bullshit as soon as I saw her name appear in my email. Despite the fact that I could afford to pay for the full catering service, she accused me of being frugal in the email. She expressed her satisfaction that I would never become pregnant and said that I had always been stuck up just because I was born into a wealthy family. She went on to tell me how she had just used me to ease her life over the years. After that, she repeatedly called me ugly and said that I wasn't worthy of my spouse. She said that because I was too unattractive to be married to my husband, he had married me for my money. She accused me of causing friction between her and her spouse. She essentially called me every derogatory name in the book and used explosive profanities throughout the emails. My spouse lost it the moment I showed him the mail. On several times throughout the years, both of us have gone above and above to support this woman. When she was single and grieving over her numerous breakups, we were there for her. Every time we went on vacation, we brought her along, and on multiple occasions, we even covered her airfare and accommodations. A while back, my husband had given Sarah's parents a loan and assisted them in fixing up their home. She had always been like family to us. Mark was contacted right away by my husband, who extended an invitation to dinner so that we could talk about the circumstances. We showed Mark the email when he got there, and his expression was one of pure disgust. He also accused him of cheating on her by showing us text messages he had received from her in which she used similar foul language. Given that it was not something to be casually tossed around or voiced in resentment towards one spouse, we were deeply troubled by the seriousness of the accusation. I had only recently severed my relationship with my old best friend, so it was difficult to believe how much she had changed. Mark told us that he had gotten in touch with a well-known divorce attorney. On his lawyer's advice, he simply saved screenshots of everything she sent him and never responded to her texts, regardless of how heinous or insane they were. In order to show his divorce attorney the email she sent me, he also snapped a picture of it. Since I first shared the story, I've gotten a few direct messages from people who are concerned about Sarah and believe that she may have neurological problems due to the abrupt change in her behavior. She has always struggled with her temper, and I just wanted to let these people know that. Even during our time at college, I have witnessed her lose her temper easily and use foul language against others, even in public places, even though I have never been the target of her rage. Even though I don't think it's a medical problem, my husband and I will still attempt to contact her parents about it. We're going to tell them everything and show them all of the emails and messages she sent us. It is entirely up to them to take her for a test in spite of everything if they start to suspect that she is not feeling well. I don't plan on answering her email or unblocking her. I have gone above and beyond for this woman, so it is really discouraging that she still treats me badly, degrades me, and treats me disrespectfully. I intend to move on from this whole situation and enjoy my life with my spouse and our dogs. To put it mildly, the last few months have been an emotional roller coaster. I hope that, like my husband and I, everyone is having a fantastic start to the new year. We're taking a much-needed vacation from our demanding jobs in the Maldives right now. Considering the year we've had, we made the decision to take a break from work and unwind. We've been spending our days at the resort enjoying cool cocktails and relaxing on the beaches thus far. Now, for the much-needed update that many of you have requested, Mark and Sarah are officially divorced, as one might anticipate. Mark's attorney presented evidence and their prenuptial agreement, which sparked a heated court case. Despite Sarah's efforts with her lawyer, they were unable to win the case. However, both parties have been ordered to create plans to co-parent together in the best interest of the child's well-being. After we reached out to her parents about her erratic behavior, we have since learned that Sarah had to move back to her parents' house, apparently due to her pregnancy and lack of proper work experience. She was unable to support herself for long just through social media. As a result, she had to move back in with her parents. I also learned from our mutual friends that after the disastrous baby shower, everyone quickly dropped her from their circle as they didn't want to be involved in her drama. Since filing for divorce, Mark held off visiting her until she was taken to the delivery room, where he remained throughout the night to witness the arrival of their daughter. He has been content caring for the baby, spending time with her whenever possible and paying for the child support according to their agreement. He still gets together with my husband every weekend, either to play golf or enjoy drinks in the evening. Regarding the baby shower, caterer Sarah had no other option but to compensate the bill after the caterer threatened legal action. I have received a few subsequent emails from Sarah, where she still holds me responsible for the way her life has turned out. Despite her parents taking her for numerous medical tests, she's perfectly healthy and therefore her immature actions have no excuses. Hopefully, for the sake of her daughter, she will try to change herself and become a better person in the future. As for me and my husband, we didn't let this incident affect our happy and healthy marriage. We moved past it after a month and focused on our personal and professional lives. We still make sure to go out on our Sunday dates, just like we did when we first started dating. Whenever I look at my husband, I still feel the same excitement and appreciation that I did when we first got together. I'm grateful to be spending my life with him. I want to extend my empathy to all the couples who have expressed their difficulties in bearing children. I want you to know that it's perfectly fine. Life has its own ways, and we have to trust the journey. If you truly love your partner, there are other options available to become parents. However, my husband and I feel fulfilled with each other's company, and we have decided to focus on spending the rest of our lives in happiness together. Story 3. While her children did nothing, I paid for my mother-in-law's 50th birthday celebration. However, she abruptly banned me, so I had to cancel everything. She's weeping now. I'm 26. Women. Almost 3 years have passed since I married my 29-year-old husband, and I've always known that his family doesn't particularly like me. None of my husband's siblings, who include a younger brother of 21 and 2 younger twin sisters, all of whom are 23 years old, appear to like me. This also applies to my mother-in-law. Although I've never been able to pinpoint the specific reason for their strong distaste for me, I was resolved to make things right, since I wanted to have a positive connection with my in-laws. I thus made the decision to organize my mother in-law's 50th birthday celebration this year. My husband told me not to do that, stating that rather than making an effort to be kind and win his family over, I should just let it alone if they don't appear to like me. But since I genuinely wanted to get along with them, I chose to disregard it. I'm simply a people person, and I had to make amends because I couldn't bear the idea that these individuals didn't like me for no obvious reason. I began organizing the party a few days ago, and even attempted to engage my husband's siblings, but they showed little enthusiasm and advised me to handle everything on my own if I so desired. I paid for all the food and decor well in advance and reserved one of my mother-in-law's favorite restaurants, where she and her late husband frequently went on dates. Since my mother-in-law was quite picky about things like this, I really ignored it all myself and made sure that everything complied with her standards and tastes. I also extended an invitation to some of our family members and some of her closest acquaintances, after discussing who she would like there with my hubby. In essence, I handled all of the planning and payment on my own, with a little assistance from my husband, while her own children did not even make a financial contribution. Despite my husband's objections, we went to see her yesterday, the night before her birthday. In any case, when we arrived, we saw that her other children were already present and were somewhat taken aback by our presence, but they remained silent. We had something planned for her, so after some small conversation, I eventually got to the point and told her that we would be seeing her at the restaurant next evening. She thanked my husband and grinned, but he reminded her that I was the one she should be and that it was all me. I was somewhat perplexed when she immediately thanked me with her face forward. I tried to convince her to appreciate my efforts by telling her that I had invited all of her close friends and some of her relatives, and that I had also made sure to choose all of her favorite foods. However, a sour expression swept over her face, and she then thanked me in the most phony, sugar-coated way possible before informing me that although she valued my efforts, she was sad that one wouldn't be going. Startled, I asked her why. She responded by saying that she wanted her 50th birthday to be unique and that it should only be attended by family. She would like it if I made myself scarce the next day since, although she did view her friends as family, she did not view me as such. My spouse and I appeared really taken aback, and I then understood that he had been correct all along and that I should never have tried at all, because she was obviously never going to value any of it. Never. What irritated me even more, though, was that my husband's siblings appeared as though they would start laughing at any moment. I got up, told her she could go to hell, and threatened to have security escort her out if she dared to show up the next day. All of their smug expressions vanished as a result, and when my mother-in-law accused me of being aloof and unkind, I simply laughed in her face and remarked that it was quite rich coming from her. She attempted to persuade me that I was mistaken after some back and forth. I informed her that my choice was definitive and that she didn't deserve anything kind. She and her children appeared enraged, and she broke down in tears just before I left, most likely in a last-ditch attempt to win my sympathy. I no longer cared, though. I was furious. I attempted to cancel the reservation on the way home, but it was too late and I was unable to do anything. Despite his apparent discomfort, my husband remained silent about the entire situation. Aside from stating that I had done the right thing, he had never been particularly expressive with his family and had always preferred to avoid getting involved in these matters, so I was okay with him going out for a smoke after we got home. Furthermore, it was kind of him to not point the finger at me because I was the one who had disregarded his advice. Nevertheless, I chose to cancel all of the invites because I had already paid for the venue and the food. This was rather last minute and upset many of the guests, but I didn't mind because they were primarily my mother-in-law's friends. To make it worthwhile, I invited a few of my own friends instead. My husband joined in as well because I was feeling pretty irritated by everything that had happened, and I also convinced him to invite some of his friends so we could have a party. Just before they arrived, we took down the decorations, and they had a great time. After I returned home today and uploaded all the photos, my sister-in-law texted me to say that I had ruined her mother's birthday, and that it was very self-centered of me to use the location for myself, especially since I knew how much it meant to my mother-in-law. However, I don't feel bad about what I did and believe it was totally reasonable. I just hope I'm correct in calling off my mother-in-law's birthday celebration after she informed me that I wasn't welcome. Update 1. I asked my husband if I should apologize to his family after I told him about the message his sister had sent me, and he said that I should not. He even admitted to me that he had had enough of their actions and believed it would be best if we disconnected them completely. His family, particularly my mother-in-law, depended heavily on him for money and other necessities, so this was a big deal. She would have to rely on her other children instead of my husband, who is reasonably well off and owns his own business. This was problematic because my husband's siblings were useless and all changed jobs every few months. This was a big decision because, in all honesty, they were heavily reliant on them for money and other things. I tried to talk him out of it, but he was quite insistent. To be honest, I've always observed that his family distanced themselves from him, so I'm positive that there's something more going on here. The more time we spent dating, additionally, he had become very estranged from his family by the time we were getting married. I recall him telling me multiple times that he would invite his family over for dinner when we were dating, and even in the early days of our marriage, so it wasn't his fault. But they'd always make up some excuse to avoid it. I was sure that I was part of the reason as well, and that was another factor that made me so desperate to build a relationship with my in-laws so that my husband could also reconnect with his family. I'm quite sure that there's something that my husband isn't telling me or hasn't told me because he's not the kind of person to simply abandon his family. He used to tell me earlier about how much family meant to him. And so this sudden decision, although fair in light of how my mother-in-law treated me a couple of days back, is very strange and out of character for him. I'm determined to get to the bottom of this because I don't want my husband to be miserable because of me or resent me in the future. I'm just hoping that he finally feels comfortable enough to tell me what made him take such a drastic measure. Now, update 2, after a lot of pestering him, my husband finally opened up as to why he's cutting his family off after all these years. I knew that his father had passed away when he was 21 and his siblings were all in school. Back then, his mother had never worked a day in her life, so naturally it was on him to get to work and be the breadwinner of the family, since the money his dad had left him wouldn't be enough to cover it all. He worked hard day and night, and finally, when he was about 23, he found some investors for his startup, and things finally started looking up for him. He went from just getting by to flourishing, which was great for him, but it made his family immensely lazy and materialistic. Now that he was making more money, they started getting more and more dependent on him, but he didn't say anything about it or protest since he felt that he owed them this, as this is what his father would have wanted him to do. They also treated his girlfriends quite badly, since they believed that having other people in his life would distract him, and his sole aim should be to provide for his family. This is why when we met, and it became clear that I wasn't someone they could just mistreat and drive away. Since I was just that determined to be with my husband, they started getting annoyed by my very existence and tried to poison my husband against me. However, by then he'd had enough, and there was a lot of fighting and bickering while we were dating. That happened behind my back where his family wanted him to break up with me, but he was intent on marrying me. Eventually, they started distancing him from themselves in an attempt to guilt trip him, but they still came to him for money. This tactic also failed to break us apart, and several years later, here we are still going strong after the whole birthday fiasco. My husband told me that while his sister texted me to guilt trip me, his mother had called him up to do the same to him and was trying to emotionally manipulate him into leaving me since I'd insulted her. That's why he decided that he'd had enough of this, and it was time to let go. I'm still in shock that his family put him through all of this, even though he was the one who's been supporting them throughout, and I pretty much lost any respect I ever had for them because they're just plain greedy. I'm really happy that I decided to stick it out with my husband, despite his family's attempts to separate us and drive me away so they could hog his money. Truth be told, I don't care how much money he has because I love him for who he is, and his bank balance has nothing to do with it. Now that I know the whole story, I'm surprised that he was able to put up with this and even keep it all a secret from me for so long to spare my feelings, since I wanted to have a good bond with my in-laws, but he knew that was never going to happen. I think he's making the right decision now and that his family deserves to get cut off. They're incredibly selfish and greedy and have no respect for the one man who had their back for so long, against all odds. Update 3 today, my husband finally called his mother up and told her that he doesn't want to hear from her or his siblings unless they change their ways. And they'll also have to find their own source of income, since he isn't going to continue supporting them his entire life. Just as I'd expected, this decision was met with uproar on their end, and I could hear my mother-in-law screaming at my husband, even though his phone wasn't even on loudspeaker. There was a pretty nasty argument that broke out between them, and since I was in the same room as my husband, I heard every single word of it. My mother-in-law obviously tried to blame me for this, and said that I must have influenced his decision to cut them off somehow. She also accused me of trying to break their family apart, and said that my husband shouldn't let himself get manipulated by his wife again. The irony of her telling my husband to not allow himself to get manipulated was pretty funny to me. Obviously, my husband defended me to the best of his abilities, and even told her that his siblings need to find decent jobs because they're all adults now, and it's pretty pathetic that they still have to rely on him to provide for them. She started accusing my husband of letting the money and power of being in such a high-paying position get to his head, and that I was also probably encouraging him to cut his family off, which is why he was treating his own blood so cruelly. It was all classic manipulation and emotional blackmail to keep him under her thumb, but I wasn't going to let that happen anymore. Now that I knew what she and her other kids had been up to, when things started getting too heated and I could see my husband getting flustered and teary-eyed out of sheer frustration, I decided to intervene. I told her that my husband's mind was made up, and if she and her kids didn't get in line soon, then they'd be losing my husband's support forever. Now the ball was in their court. They could either behave like decent human beings and respect me and my husband to continue being in our lives, or they could be the blood-sucking, materialistic all-holes that they were and get cut out of my husband's life entirely. Having said that, I hung up and muted all notifications on my husband's phone so that he wouldn't have to deal with them for a while and had time to calm down. It's been an hour since the call ended, and we've kept our phones aside to watch a movie and keep ourselves distracted for now. Update for since harassing my husband and ruining his day wasn't enough. My mother-in-law decided to bother me instead after the movie ended. My husband decided to finish up some pending work and I decided to check my phone. I had several missed calls from my mother-in-law and innumerable texts saying absolutely disgusting things to me that were full of curse words from my husband's siblings. I wasn't surprised in the least though, since this is exactly what I had expected. They do. I just took screenshots of it all for later and ignored it. I continued to reply to work emails and stuff for the next 10 minutes, but that's when my mother-in-law called again and I accidentally ended up accepting the call. She then proceeded to say the nastiest things about me and my upbringing, calling me a manipulative and selfish gold digger who was out to ruin my husband. I didn't even respond to any of her accusations and simply waited for her to be done with it. When she finally seemed to run out of steam, I told her that everything that she accused me of doing was things that she herself was guilty of. So before pointing fingers, she should probably just introspect a little. I also told her that I was glad that my husband was finally getting rid of freeloaders like her and her other kids, since they didn't deserve to even breathe the same air as he did. Then I hung up and blocked her and my husband's siblings everywhere that I possibly could, so that they couldn't get to me anymore. It's just sad that people are willing to stoop so low just to be able to avoid doing any work for themselves. I haven't told my husband about his mother calling me up yet, because I just don't want to stress him out even more. But if this happens again, then I'll definitely be letting him know and ensuring that they're out of our lives forever. They have absolutely no right to disturb our peace in this manner. I don't know what they're going to do next, but I'm sure that my mother-in-law is definitely not going to stop unless we decide to take legal action against her or something. I'm hope that it doesn't have to come to that, as that'll be a tremendous issue for my spouse emotionally. But if it does, I'm ready to make sure that we see it through. They're not messing with my husband anymore, that's for sure. Update 5, almost 2 weeks have passed since the last update, and so much has happened since then. After I blocked my mother-in-law, my husband and I had dinner and went off to sleep, hoping that there'd be some peace and quiet the next day. But the very next day, My mother-in-law showed up at our doorstep with her 3 grown children and demanded an explanation for everything that had been said and done so far. She looked pretty angry, and so did my husband, siblings, and I knew for a fact that this was going to be very stressful for my husband. I decided to stay in the room despite their protestations, saying that I had no right to be there because this was a family issue and I'm not family. I let them know that they were trespassing upon my privacy and were standing beneath my roof, thus they had no right to tell me if I could stay or not. Then they started verbally abusing my husband, blasting him with charges of being selfish and unreasonable, and even going to the level of stating that he was leaving his family, solely to keep his wife happy. My spouse had kept silent and was already looking quite red in the face, so I knew that was my cue to take over. Since my husband is an extremely sensitive man, especially when it comes to his family and loved ones, I knew that he wouldn't be able to fight them and defend himself against their false charges and manipulation, since that's how soft-hearted and nice he was. And although they were only exploiting him for his money, he sincerely and truly did love his family. So I advised him to collect himself and ordered his family to go since they were pissing me off. And most crucially, they were making my spouse cry. My mother-in-law started arguing with me, stating that I don't get to push her around, especially in her son's house, and that she may remain for as long as she wants to. She still didn't stop chatting to my husband, even though he appeared very unhappy with everything. It was awful to see that she couldn't care less about her own son's sentiments, and what mattered to her most was the money. So she started telling him that she hadn't raised him like way, and that she was sad that he was choosing his wife over his own family. His brother even claimed that the only role he should be doing was that of a son and a brother. Since I was a gold digger anyhow, I didn't deserve to have a spouse like him in the first place. That infuriated me off, and I lost my cool at that moment. I yelled at him, telling him precisely how I felt about them all. They were all indolent, useless fools who were only able to survive thanks to my husband's generosity and goodwill because they couldn't take care of themselves. They were basically the epitome of money diggers. Furthermore, in addition to continuously circling my husband in order to gain money, they had the gall to be so ungrateful as to single him out after everything he had done for them. They were startled into silence, and although I could tell they were fighting back, they were unable to take advantage of the situation. Before I reported them to the police for showing up without permission and then refusing to leave, I told them to leave, so they went. My mother-in-law, however, continued to think she could persuade my husband to pick them over me. According to her, if his father had been living to see how their oldest son had treated them today, he would have been disappointed. Playing that card all the time to emotionally manipulate my spouse struck me as being really low and repulsive, and I could tell my husband was struggling to keep his composure by the time they drove off. As soon as they departed, he began to cry hysterically, and I had to spend hours soothing him. I wished I had never attempted to throw my mother-in-law a birthday party in the first place because I felt awful about the entire situation. However, that was also the reason this problem had arisen. Additionally, I'm glad this occurred sooner rather than later. In any case, once his family departed, I made sure they couldn't reach us online and barred him from his phone and social media accounts. When he had sufficiently calmed down, I informed him that we should start investigating lawyers since I was certain that we would continue to hear from his mother and brothers. Despite his reluctance to acknowledge it, he agreed with that. He was fully aware that his relatives would do everything to get money from him. To be prudent, we thus began searching for family attorneys. And we were absolutely correct to do so since, only a few days after that altercation, my mother-in-law issued us a legal notice requesting that he compensate them lavishly for the countless amounts of money he had stolen from them to launch his business following the death of his father. I found it disgusting that she and her kids would lie about something so important and disparage my spouse. He had only ever utilized money that he had earned on his own and had never taken a dime from whatever his father had left them. I was incensed that they dared to spread such a falsehood since he was entirely self-made, and it was an insult to his dignity to even say such a thing. Additionally, because my husband's firm is rather large, it generated a lot of conversation, which had an impact on his business as well. This was foolish of them, but after over 2 weeks, we were able to demonstrate that they were lying and that none of their statements were accurate. Because they attempted to discredit us and endanger my husband's job, they are now the ones who must pay us a hefty fine. According to what I've been told, my mother-in-law and her children have been shunned by the rest of the family due to their naughty little behavior. And in order to pay the bills that my husband has been handling up to this point, all 3 of those lazy fools are frantically looking for work. They truly and completely deserve this. Therefore, I'm happy that it's happening to them. At last, we can put this episode behind us and completely forget about them. My spouse and I are much happy today, and I plan to maintain this state of affairs indefinitely.